Welcome everyone. Today we're diving deep into something truly fascinating and powerful, the Ethiopian Bible. This isn't just any ancient text, it's one of the oldest and most complete Bibles in the world, holding books that you won't find in most modern versions. In this video I'll be discussing everything you need to know about the Ethiopian Bible, its history, its unique structure, and most importantly, the extraordinary number of books it contains. While most Bibles have 66 books, the Ethiopian Bible includes over 80, with sacred texts like the Book of Enoch, Jubilees, and many others that were preserved for centuries in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Stay with me till the end, because we're going to uncover the hidden wisdom, lost scriptures, and ancient truths that make this Bible unlike any other. So let's begin our journey into the Ethiopian Bible, book by book, and discover what makes it so special. The Book of Genesis, Ethiopian Bible. In the beginning, before time itself began, there was only God, eternal, uncreated, perfect. The heavens and the earth had not yet taken form. There was no light, no sea, no stars, just the infinite presence of the Creator. Then by his command, creation began. The voice of God shattered the void. He said, "Let there be light," and light appeared. It spread across the deep like a radiant wave, separating darkness and day. The Creator saw that it was good. Day by day, the order of the world unfolded. On the second day, he established the firmament, the sky above, and the waters below. On the third, he gathered the waters into one place, so that dry land could emerge. He clothed the earth with green fields, trees and plants of every kind. On the fourth day, the sun, moon and stars were set in their places to govern the times and seasons. On the fifth day, the waters came alive with fish and creatures of the deep. The skies filled with birds of all colors and songs. On the sixth day, he brought forth animals of every kind upon the land, beasts, cattle, and creeping things. Then, in a moment unlike any other, God formed man. From the dust of the ground he shaped him, and breathed into him the breath of life. Man became a living soul. He was named Adam, the first of humankind. God placed him in a lush garden called Eden, a place of beauty and abundance, watered by rivers that flowed in every direction. In this garden stood two special trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God commanded Adam, "You may eat freely of every tree in this garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day you eat of it, you shall surely die." But Adam was alone. So God caused a deep sleep to fall upon him, took one of his ribs, and fashioned a woman, Eve. She was his companion, his equal, bone of his bones and flesh of his flesh. Together they lived in harmony with creation, innocent and unashamed. But in the garden lurked a serpent, cunning and deceitful. He questioned Eve, twisting the command of God, saying, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree?" Eve answered truthfully. But the serpent tempted her further, promising that by eating the forbidden fruit they would become like God, knowing good and evil. Eve looked at the fruit. It was beautiful and tempting. She ate, and she gave it to Adam, who also ate. In that moment their eyes were opened. Innocence was lost. Shame entered. They hid from God among the trees. When God called out, "Adam, where are you?" they trembled. Their disobedience brought judgment. The serpent was cursed to crawl upon its belly. Eve was told that pain in childbirth would increase, and that strife would mark the relationship between man and woman. Adam was told that the ground would bring forth thorns, and he would toil for his bread. They were clothed in garments made by God himself, and then cast out of Eden, lest they eat from the tree of life and live forever in their fallen state. At the entrance of the garden, God placed cherubim and a flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life. Outside Eden, Adam and Eve began the story of humanity. They bore children: Cain, the elder, a farmer of the ground, and Abel the younger, a shepherd of flocks. Both brought offerings to God, but Abel's was accepted while Cain's was not. Jealousy took root. In anger, Cain led Abel into the field and killed him, the first murder. God confronted Cain, asking, "Where is your brother?" Cain replied, "Am I my brother's keeper?" For this sin, Cain was cursed. The ground would no longer yield for him, and he would wander as a fugitive. Yet even then, God placed a mark upon Cain to protect him from being killed. Humanity grew. Adam and Eve bore another son, Seth, through whom a righteous line would continue. Generations passed. People multiplied on the earth. Giants and mighty men appeared, beings of great strength and renown. But wickedness also increased. The thoughts of humanity turned to evil continually. God looked upon the earth with sorrow, grieved by the corruption of his creation. Yet among the people one man stood righteous, Noah. He walked with God when others did not. God revealed to Noah his plan: the world would be cleansed by a great flood, but Noah and his family would be spared. He was commanded to build an ark, a massive vessel of wood, and to gather pairs of every living creature, male and female, into it. Noah obeyed. He built the ark as instructed, warning others of what was to come, though they did not believe him. When the time came, the animals entered the ark, and Noah's family followed. God himself shut the door. Then the heavens opened. Rain poured down for 40 days and nights. The waters rose, covering mountains and sweeping away everything that lived on land. Humanity in its pride and wickedness perished, except for Noah, his family, and the creatures within the ark. After many months, the waters began to recede. The ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. Noah sent out a raven, then a dove. When the dove returned with a fresh olive leaf, Noah knew that the land was drying. Eventually God told Noah to leave the ark. Noah built an altar and offered sacrifices to God, who smelled the pleasing aroma, and promised never again to destroy the earth with a flood. He set a rainbow in the sky as the sign of this covenant. From Noah's sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth, the nations of the world spread out. But pride returned quickly. In the land of Shinar, people said, "Let us build a city and a tower that reaches heaven, and make a name for ourselves." This became the Tower of Babel. God saw their arrogance and confused their language, scattering them across the earth. The tower remained unfinished, a monument to human pride. From the line of Shem came Abram, later named Abraham, a man chosen by God to begin a new covenant. God called him to leave his homeland and journey to a land he would show him. Abraham obeyed in faith, though he did not yet see the promise. God told him that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars, and that through him all nations would be blessed. Abraham's journey was marked by both faith and trial. God tested him, promised him a son though he and his wife Sarah were old, and later made a covenant with him, a promise sealed by obedience. From Abraham came Isaac. From Isaac came Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Jacob's 12 sons became the fathers of the tribes of Israel. Among them was Joseph, a young man beloved by his father, but hated by his brothers. They sold him into slavery in Egypt. Yet God was with Joseph, raising him from prisoner to ruler, second only to Pharaoh. Through Joseph's wisdom, Egypt survived a great famine. His family eventually came to dwell there, setting the stage for the next part of the story, the rise of Israel in Egypt, and the events that would unfold in the book of Exodus. Before I give you part 2, Exodus, just a quick note, so we stay on the same page. The book of Exodus in the Ethiopian Canon follows the same core story as in other Christian Bibles: the rise of Moses, God delivering Israel from slavery, the plagues, the crossing of the Red Sea, the giving of the law at Sinai, and the building of the tabernacle, with some additional reverence and commentary in Ethiopian tradition on the covenant and worship. Let's get beginning toward the book of Exodus. Years passed since Joseph brought his family to Egypt. The children of Israel grew into a great multitude. They prospered and filled the land. But a new Pharaoh arose who did not remember Joseph, and he saw the Israelites' numbers as a threat. To control them, he enslaved them with hard labor, forcing them to build cities of brick and stone under the burning sun. Even in oppression, the people continued to multiply. So Pharaoh ordered a cruel decree: every male child born to the Hebrews must be thrown into the Nile River. In these dark days, a Levite woman gave birth to a son. She hid him for 3 months, then placed him in a basket coated with tar and set it among the reeds by the river. By divine providence, Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe and discovered the basket. She felt compassion for the crying child and decided to adopt him. She named him Moses, meaning drawn out of the water. Unknown to her, Moses' own mother was chosen to nurse him, watching as her son grew up in Pharaoh's palace, with the education and privilege of royalty. When Moses became a man, he saw the suffering of his people. One day he witnessed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. In a surge of anger, Moses struck the Egyptian and killed him. When the deed was known, Pharaoh sought to kill Moses. Moses fled to the land of Midian, becoming a shepherd in the wilderness. He married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, and lived far from Egypt's power. But God had not forgotten his people. One day, as Moses tended sheep near Mount Horeb, he saw a bush aflame, burning yet not consumed. He drew near, and the voice of God called out from the fire, "Moses, Moses, here I am," he answered. "Do not come closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you stand is holy ground." God revealed his plan. He had heard the cries of his people and would deliver them. He commanded Moses to return to Egypt and speak to Pharaoh. Moses trembled, fearing he was unworthy, but God assured him, giving him signs and appointing his brother Aaron as his spokesman. So Moses returned to Egypt, stood before Pharaoh, and declared to him, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may serve me." Pharaoh's heart was hard. He refused, increasing the Hebrews' burden. Then came the signs and wonders, the 10 plagues, each a strike against Egypt's pride and gods. First, the waters of the Nile turned to blood. Fish died, the river stank, and people could not drink. Yet Pharaoh's heart was unmoved. Then came frogs in swarms covering the land. Dust became gnats. Flies filled every house. Disease struck the livestock. Boils broke out on skin. Hail shattered crops. Locusts devoured the rest, and darkness fell thick over the land for 3 days. But Pharaoh's heart remained stubborn until the final plague, the death of the firstborn. God instructed the Israelites to sacrifice a lamb, mark their doorposts with its blood, and eat the Passover meal in haste. That night, the angel of death passed through Egypt. In every house without the blood, the firstborn died, from Pharaoh's palace to the prisoner's cell. But the Israelites were spared. Grief filled Egypt. Pharaoh finally yielded. "Rise up, go out from among my people, and bless me also." The Israelites departed in haste, carrying gold and silver given to them by the Egyptians. God led them by a pillar of cloud by day, and a pillar of fire by night. But Pharaoh soon regretted letting them go. With his army and chariots, he pursued them to the shore of the Red Sea. The people cried out in fear, but Moses stood firm. "Fear not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord." God commanded Moses to stretch out his staff. The sea parted, walls of water standing on either side. The Israelites crossed on dry ground. When Pharaoh's army followed, the waters returned, swallowing them whole. The people sang songs of deliverance, praising the Lord who triumphed gloriously. In the wilderness, the journey began. The people often complained, but God provided manna from heaven, water from rocks, quail for meat. At Mount Sinai, thunder and lightning covered the mountain. A thick cloud descended as God revealed himself in majesty. Moses ascended the mountain for 40 days and nights. There God gave the 10 Commandments, written on stone by his own hand, laws that would shape the nation. The commandments declared, "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make idols. You shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not covet." God established a covenant with his people. He gave laws for worship, justice, and community. He commanded the building of the tabernacle, a holy sanctuary, where his presence would dwell among them. He appointed Aaron and his sons as priests. But while Moses was on the mountain, the people grew restless. They made a golden calf, calling it their god. When Moses descended and saw the idolatry, he shattered the stone tablets in anger. Judgment fell upon the calf. Then in mercy God renewed the covenant. Moses interceded for the people, and the presence of the Lord continued to lead them. The rest of Exodus describes the careful construction of the tabernacle according to divine pattern. Every thread, board and vessel made as God commanded. When the work was finished, a cloud covered the tent, and the glory of the Lord filled it. Wherever the cloud lifted, the Israelites journeyed. Wherever it settled, they made their camp. God's presence was with them as they traveled toward the land he had promised. If you're enjoying this video and want to learn even more about the Ethiopian Bible, don't forget to leave a comment below. Your feedback means a lot, and it motivates me to bring you even more powerful insights and hidden scriptures from these ancient texts. Let me know if you'd like me to cover specific books in detail. I'm reading every single comment. Thank you so much for your support. I truly wish all of you wisdom, light, and blessings on your journey as we continue exploring these sacred writings together. The Book of Leviticus, Book 3. After the cloud of God's presence descended upon the newly built tabernacle, the people of Israel camped at the foot of Mount Sinai. There the Lord spoke to Moses from within the tent of meeting. His voice carried commands that would shape the identity of his people as a holy nation. Leviticus begins with the sacrificial system, a way for sinful humanity to approach a holy God. God outlined different types of offerings: the burnt offering, a complete offering consumed by fire, symbolizing total surrender and atonement; the grain offering, fine flour mixed with oil and frankincense, representing thanksgiving and dedication; the peace offering, shared between God, priest, and worshipper, expressing fellowship and gratitude; the sin offering, for atonement when someone broke God's commands unintentionally; the guilt offering, for offenses requiring restitution, emphasizing both forgiveness and responsibility. Each ritual was precise. The animal had to be without defect, the priest's role carefully defined, and the blood sprinkled on the altar as a sign of cleansing. These sacrifices were not empty rituals. They were a way for the Israelites to maintain relationship with God, to acknowledge their need for mercy, and to live within his covenant. Next came instructions for the ordination of the priests. Aaron and his sons were chosen to serve in the sanctuary. They were washed with water, clothed in sacred garments, anointed with oil, and consecrated through sacrifices. For 7 days they remained at the entrance of the tabernacle, as Moses performed the rituals exactly as God commanded. On the 8th day, Aaron offered sacrifices on behalf of the people. As the offerings burned on the altar, the glory of the Lord appeared, and fire came out from his presence, consuming the offering. The people fell on their faces in awe, but the holiness of God was not to be treated lightly. 2 of Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, something he had not commanded. Fire came out and consumed them instantly. Moses reminded Aaron that God must be regarded as holy by those who approach him. This sobering event underscored the seriousness of worship. The Lord then gave laws about clean and unclean animals, what could and could not be eaten. These instructions set Israel apart from other nations and constantly reminded them of their calling to be distinct. There were also detailed laws regarding cleanliness after childbirth, skin diseases, and bodily discharges. These were not merely hygienic regulations, they were spiritual lessons about purity and the need for cleansing before approaching God's presence. At the heart of Leviticus is the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, described in chapter 6. On this solemn day, once a year, the high priest would enter the most holy place, behind the curtain, to make atonement for all Israel. 2 goats were brought. One was sacrificed for sin, and the other, the scapegoat, had the sins of the people symbolically placed upon it, and was sent into the wilderness, carrying their iniquities away. This powerful ritual expressed both the gravity of sin and the mercy of God. The book also gives moral and spiritual laws. God said repeatedly, "Be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." These commands touched every part of life: honoring parents, keeping the Sabbath, rejecting idolatry, protecting the poor and the foreigner, avoiding theft and injustice, maintaining sexual purity and family order. There were also warnings against following the detestable practices of surrounding nations. The Israelites were to reflect God's character in their conduct, their worship, and their community. God outlined the consequences of obedience and disobedience. Blessings would follow if they kept his covenant: rain in its season, fruitful harvests, safety from enemies, and God's presence dwelling among them. But if they turned away, curses would follow: disease, famine, defeat, and exile. These blessings and warnings were not mere threats. They were the terms of the covenant between God and his people. Leviticus ends with instructions about vows, dedications, and tithes, ways for the people to honor God with their possessions and commitment. Throughout this book, the message is clear: approaching a holy God requires sacrifice, purity, and obedience. Every offering, every law, every ritual was meant to teach the people about God's holiness and their need to be set apart. For the Ethiopian Church, Leviticus holds a special place because it preserves the ancient priestly traditions that point to the reverence and order of divine worship. The tabernacle laws, the priesthood, and the emphasis on purity all foreshadow the deeper spiritual realities fulfilled in later Revelation. Book 4. The Book of Numbers. After the Lord gave the laws at Mount Sinai and established his covenant with the people, it was time for Israel to begin their journey toward the land he had promised to their ancestors. The Book of Numbers opens with God speaking to Moses in the tent of meeting, instructing him to take a census of all the men of Israel able to go to war, tribe by tribe, name by name. The people were counted, a sign of their preparation to become not just a wandering people, but a nation organized under God's command. Each tribe received its place in the camp. The tabernacle stood at the center, and around it, the tribes encamped in a precise order. When the cloud lifted from the sanctuary, they marched in formation. When it settled, they made camp. The Levites chosen to serve in the sanctuary were not counted among the fighting men. Their role was to guard and carry the holy things. God set apart the Levites as his own, taking them instead of the firstborn sons of Israel. Their responsibilities were detailed with great care, a reflection of the Ethiopian tradition's deep respect for priesthood and sacred service. As the journey began, God guided his people with the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, the same presence that had led them out of Egypt. Trumpets were made to signal the movement of the camp and the gathering of the people, but the wilderness journey quickly revealed the hearts of the people. They began to complain about the hardships, the food, the leadership. They longed for Egypt, forgetting their slavery. God responded with both discipline and mercy, sending quail to satisfy their cravings, but also striking down the ungrateful with a plague. Even Moses' leadership was challenged. Miriam and Aaron spoke against him, and God defended his chosen servant. Miriam was struck with leprosy for a time, then healed after Moses interceded. When they reached the borders of the Promised Land, Moses sent 12 spies to explore it. For 40 days they examined the land flowing with milk and honey. They saw its beauty and its giant. 10 spies returned with fear, saying, "We cannot take it. The people are too strong." Only Joshua and Caleb trusted in God's promise. The people listened to fear. They rebelled, weeping and wishing they had died in Egypt. God declared that this generation would indeed perish in the wilderness. Only their children, along with Joshua and Caleb, would enter the land. For 40 years they would wander, 1 year for each day the spies explored. Along the journey there were more trials. A man named Korah led a rebellion against Moses and Aaron, challenging their authority. The ground opened up and swallowed the rebels, a sign of God's judgment. Plagues came, but Moses interceded again and again, standing between the living and the dead to stop the destruction. As the years passed, new instructions were given regarding offerings, priesthood and purification. The bronze serpent story took place during this time, when the people complained yet again and were bitten by fiery serpents. God told Moses to make a bronze serpent and lift it on a pole. Whoever looked at it in faith was healed. This became a lasting sign, one that would later be deeply interpreted in Ethiopian Christian tradition as a symbol of healing and divine mercy. Near the end of Numbers, as the people approached the plains of Moab, a foreign prophet named Balaam was summoned by the king of Moab to curse Israel. But God intervened, even speaking through Balaam's donkey, and Balaam ended up blessing Israel 3 times instead of cursing them. He declared, "How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel." Numbers closes with preparations for entering the promised land. A new census is taken for the new generation. Leadership begins to transition to Joshua. Instructions are given for dividing the land, establishing cities of refuge, and keeping God's commandments as they step into their future. In the Ethiopian biblical tradition, the Book of Numbers is read as part of the Orit, the sacred law given by God. It emphasizes obedience, order, and faith in God's guidance. The detailed organization of the tribes mirrors the way the Ethiopian Church values liturgical order. The wilderness journey is seen as a spiritual journey, a testing of hearts, a call to trust in God despite fear and hardship. Book 5. Deuteronomy. As the long journey through the wilderness came to an end, the people of Israel stood at the edge of the promised land. The years of wandering were almost over. Across the Jordan River lay the land that God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a land flowing with abundance, prepared for a people who had been shaped through both trials and miracles. But before they could enter, Moses, the faithful servant of God who had led them out of Egypt and through the desert, stood before the vast assembly one final time. His voice carried both the weight of leadership and the tenderness of a father. What he delivered in this moment would become the book of Deuteronomy, a final reminder, a restating of the law, and a prophetic warning for future generations. Moses began by recounting the journey from Mount Horeb to the plains of Moab. He reminded them of how God had multiplied their numbers like the stars, and how he had appointed wise leaders to guide them. He told them of their failures too, how fear had caused them to reject God's command to enter the land, leading to 40 years of wandering. But through it all, God's faithfulness had remained unbroken. He then restated the 10 Commandments, just as they had been given at Sinai. But this time, he spoke them not to a trembling generation fresh out of slavery, but to their children, people born in the wilderness, who needed to hear the covenant with fresh ears. He emphasized that this was not a distant command given to their ancestors alone. "It is not with them alone that the Lord made this covenant," Moses said, "but with us, with all of us who are alive here today." Deuteronomy is filled with passionate reminders to love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and strength, to teach his words to your children, and to keep his commandments diligent. Moses warned them not to forget God when they entered the good land, when their houses were filled, their fields fruitful, and their lives prosperous. Forgetfulness would lead to pride, and pride would lead to ruin. He laid before them the blessings and curses of the covenant. If they obeyed God's commandments, blessings would overtake them, their cities and fields would flourish, their enemies would be defeated, and they would become a light among the nations. But if they turned away, curses would come, drought, defeat, exile, and hardship. This section was not merely a set of rules, it was a living covenant, a relational bond between God and his people. Moses also gave instructions for future kings, priests, and prophets, showing how Israel was to be governed in righteousness. He prophesied about a future prophet like himself, whom God would raise up to speak his words. This prophecy is deeply significant, and in many traditions, including the Ethiopian tradition, it points forward to the coming of Christ, the ultimate prophet and redeemer. The book also includes practical laws about justice, mercy, and worship. It calls for caring for the poor, the orphan, the widow, and the foreigner. It commands the people to celebrate God through feasts and offerings, and to remember his mighty acts through rituals that would pass the faith to the next generation. As Moses approached the end of his address, his tone grew even more urgent. He said, "I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live." This was not merely a political or religious speech, it was a heartfelt plea to remain faithful to the God who had rescued them. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo, from where he could see the whole promised land stretched out before him. He would not enter it himself, his journey was complete, but from that mountaintop, he saw the fulfillment of God's promise. There on the mountain, Moses died according to the word of the Lord, and God himself buried him in a valley in Moab. No one knows the place of his burial. Joshua, Moses' assistant, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, and the leadership passed to him. The people mourned Moses for 30 days, remembering the man through whom God had shown signs and wonders. In the Ethiopian Bible, Deuteronomy carries the same sacred weight, reminding readers and listeners of covenantal responsibility, divine justice, and God's unwavering faithfulness. It's not just ancient law, it's a spiritual constitution for a people chosen to reflect God's character to the world. Let's move to Book 6, Joshua, which marks a powerful turning point in the biblical story, the entrance into the Promised Land, the fulfillment of long-awaited promises, and the establishment of God's people in their inheritance. In the Ethiopian Bible, the book of Joshua holds a special place as the bridge between the law, Torah, and the era of conquest, settlement, and covenant renewal. After the death of Moses, the leadership mantle passed to Joshua, the faithful servant who had stood by Moses from the days of the wilderness. God himself spoke to Joshua with clarity and power. "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given you, as I said to Moses." God commanded Joshua to be strong and courageous, to meditate on the book of the law day and night, and to never let it depart from his mouth. Success would come not through human strength, but through faithful obedience to God's word. With renewed strength, Joshua led the people to the banks of the Jordan River. The river was overflowing its banks, humanly impossible to cross. But as the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant stepped into the water, the flow of the Jordan miraculously stopped, and the people crossed over on dry ground. A monument of 12 stones was set up at Gilgal to remind future generations of the miracle, a lasting testimony that God's power goes before his people. Their first major challenge lay before them: Jericho, a fortified city with massive walls. But God's plan for victory was unlike any military strategy. For 6 days, the people marched silently around the city once each day, with priests blowing trumpets. On the 7th day they marched 7 times, and when Joshua gave the command, the people shouted with one voice. The walls of Jericho collapsed, and the city was taken not by human might, but by the hand of the Lord. However, early victories were followed by a sobering lesson. A man named Achan disobeyed God by taking forbidden items from Jericho. Because of this sin, the Israelites were initially defeated at Ai, a smaller city. Joshua sought the Lord in anguish, and God revealed the hidden sin. Once the camp was purified, Israel attacked again and triumphed. This showed the people that God's favor is tied to obedience, not just strength. Throughout Joshua's leadership, the Israelites conquered key territories, defeating kings and taking possession of lands God had promised to their ancestors. The campaign was not merely about land. It was about establishing God's covenant people in a place where they could live according to His ways, shining as an example to surrounding nations. After the conquests, Joshua divided the land among the 12 tribes of Israel, giving each their inheritance. The tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh settled on the east side of the Jordan, while the others took portions west of the river. Special cities were appointed as cities of refuge, places where someone who accidentally caused a death could flee for protection until a fair trial, an early example of divine justice and mercy working hand in hand. One of the most memorable moments came when Joshua gathered all the people at Shechem. There he reminded them of their history, God's deliverance from Egypt, His victories on their behalf, and His unchanging faithfulness. Then he issued a challenge that would echo through generations. Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The people responded with loyalty, pledging to serve God alone. A covenant was renewed, and Joshua set up a stone as a witness of their promise. Joshua's life came to a peaceful end at the age of 80. He was buried in the land of his inheritance, and the generation that had witnessed God's mighty works continued to serve the Lord during his lifetime, and for some time afterward. But Joshua also warned them that if they turned away to worship foreign gods, disaster would come. In the Ethiopian Bible tradition, the book of Joshua is seen as both a historical account and a spiritual lesson. It teaches that God's promises are fulfilled through faith, courage, and obedience. The miraculous victories and territory allotments are not mere conquests, they are signs of divine faithfulness, showing that God keeps His word across generations. Joshua stands as a model of faithful leadership, a man who trusted God's commands, even when they defied human logic. Through him, the people stepped into a new chapter of their destiny. Let's continue the journey with Part 7. Judges, a dramatic and spiritually powerful section of the Ethiopian Bible that reveals what happened after Joshua's generation was gone. This book shows a cycle of faith, failure, and deliverance, where the people repeatedly turned away from God, faced consequences, cried out, and were rescued through God's chosen judges. Here's your Part 7. Judges. After Joshua and the elders who outlived him passed away, a new generation arose in Israel, a generation that did not fully remember the Lord or the mighty works He had done for their ancestors. The nation was settled in the promised land, but their hearts began to wander. Instead of driving out the remaining nations as God commanded, many Israelites compromised. They allowed pagan practices to linger among them, slowly blending into their surroundings. This led to one of the most defining patterns in Israel's history, that people would turn away from God and follow idols. God would allow foreign nations to oppress them. As a consequence, the people would cry out in distress. God would raise up a judge, a leader empowered by His Spirit, to deliver them. Peace would return until the cycle repeated. The book of Judges is filled with both triumph and tragedy, highlighting how spiritual compromise can erode a nation, but also how God's mercy never runs out. The first judge was Othniel, who delivered Israel from the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. Through him God gave the land peace for 40 years. But after Othniel died, the people once again fell into idolatry. Then came Ehud, a left-handed man chosen by God to deliver Israel from the Moabites. In a daring act, Ehud approached King Eglon of Moab with a secret message: drew his hidden sword and struck down the oppressor. With strategic brilliance, he led Israel to victory, and the land enjoyed 80 years of peace. Another remarkable figure was Deborah, a prophetess and the only female judge mentioned. At a time when Israel was cruelly oppressed by King Jabin and his commander Sisera, Deborah summoned Barak to lead the army. She declared that God had already delivered Sisera into their hands. With divine intervention, Israel won the battle, and Sisera was ultimately defeated through the unexpected courage of Jael, who brought an end to his tyranny. Deborah's leadership and prophetic song of victory stand as a powerful testimony to how God works through both men and women who trust him. Then came Gideon, a humble man from the weakest clan in Manasseh. When the angel of the Lord appeared to him, Gideon was threshing wheat in secret, hiding from the Midianites who were oppressing the land. God called him a mighty warrior and sent him to deliver Israel. At first Gideon doubted, asking for signs, the famous fleece tests, but once convinced he obeyed. God instructed Gideon to reduce his army from 32,000 to just 300 men, so that victory would clearly be God's, not man. Armed with trumpets, jars and torches, Gideon's small force surrounded the Midianite camp by night. At the sound of their shout and the breaking of the jars, panic spread among the enemy, and they turned their swords against each other. God gave Gideon and Israel a miraculous victory, proving again that faith and obedience matter more than numbers. But the story of Judges is not all victory. After each deliverance, the people often fell back into sin. Leaders arose: Tola, Jair, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and others, each playing their part in God's plan. Some, like Jephthah, were warriors with complicated stories, reminding us that God can work through imperfect people. One of the most famous judges was Samson, a man set apart from birth as a Nazirite. He possessed incredible physical strength, given by God to fight against the Philistines. But Samson's story is both heroic and tragic. His strength often outshone his wisdom. He killed a lion with his bare hands, defeated armies with a jawbone, and tore down city gates. Yet he fell into temptation through Delilah, who betrayed him. Samson was captured, blinded, and humiliated. But in his final act, he prayed to God for strength one last time. Pushing against the pillars of the Philistine temple, he brought it down, defeating more enemies in his death than in his life. His story is both a caution and a testimony of God's power working even through flawed vessels. Throughout Judges, Israel lacked a central leader, and the repeated refrain echoes. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This line captures the spiritual state of the nation. Without steadfast leadership or wholehearted devotion to God, moral chaos and foreign oppression repeatedly followed. In the Ethiopian Bible tradition, the Book of Judges is read not merely as ancient history, but as a mirror of the human heart. It reveals what happens when people forget their spiritual foundation, but it also highlights God's endless patience, his willingness to raise up deliverers again and again, and his sovereign hand guiding history toward his purposes. The judges were not kings, and many were not perfect, but they were instruments of God's mercy. Each one points forward to the ultimate deliverer, Christ, who would break the cycle of sin once and for all. The Book of Ruth. In the days when the judges ruled Israel, the land was struck by a severe famine. In the town of Bethlehem, a man named Elimelech lived with his wife Naomi and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. To escape the famine, they left their homeland and journeyed to the country of Moab, a foreign land with different customs and gods. At first, it was meant to be a temporary stay, but tragedy struck. Elimelech died, leaving Naomi a widow in a foreign land. Her 2 sons married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth, and for a while, life continued. But after about 10 years, Both Mahlon and Chilion also died, leaving Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law in sorrow and without protection. Naomi heard that the Lord had visited his people in Bethlehem and provided them with food. Broken and grieving, she decided to return home. As she set out, her daughters-in-law followed her, but she urged them to go back to their families. Naomi said she had nothing left to give them, no more sons, no more security. She believed her future was bitter. Orpah wept and kissed Naomi goodbye, returning to her people, but Ruth refused to leave. With a voice filled with unwavering loyalty, she spoke words that would echo through history. "Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." Naomi could see Ruth's determination, and together they traveled back to Bethlehem. When they arrived, the town was stirred. Naomi's friends hardly recognized her. She said, "Do not call me Naomi, which means pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." She returned with nothing except Ruth, whose faithfulness would soon become a vessel of redemption. It was the beginning of the barley harvest, and Ruth decided to go out to the fields, to glean, to pick up leftover grain behind the harvesters, as the law allowed the poor to do. By divine providence, she entered the field of a man named Boaz, a relative of Elimelech. Boaz was a man of wealth, honor, and kindness. When Boaz saw Ruth, he inquired about her. Upon learning of her loyalty to Naomi, he was deeply moved. He told Ruth to stay in his fields, to glean freely, and to drink from his workers' water jars. He instructed his men not to harm her. At mealtime, he invited her to eat with his harvesters. Ruth was astonished at his kindness, as she was a foreigner in Israel. Day after day, Ruth gleaned faithfully, providing food for Naomi. When Naomi learned that Boaz had shown kindness, hope began to flicker in her heart again. She recognized that Boaz was a kinsman redeemer, a relative with the right to redeem family property and marry a widow to preserve the family line, as the law of Israel allowed. Naomi guided Ruth with wisdom. One night Ruth went to Boaz at the threshing floor, where the harvest was processed. She approached him with humility, uncovering his feet as a symbolic request for protection and redemption. When Boaz awoke, startled, Ruth explained her request. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." Boaz was touched by her character. He said, "You have shown more kindness now than before, because you did not run after the younger men. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask." But there was another man who was a closer relative, and the law required he be offered the chance to redeem first. The next day, Boaz met this man and the elders at the town gate. He presented the matter openly. The land belonging to Elimelech needed to be redeemed, and along with it came the duty to marry Ruth. The man declined, fearing it would complicate his inheritance. So before witnesses, Boaz agreed to redeem the land and take Ruth as his wife. The people and elders blessed the union, saying, "May the Lord make this woman like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel." Boaz and Ruth married, and God blessed their union with a son named Obed. Naomi, once bitter and empty, now held the child in her arms, and her heart was filled with joy. The women said, "Praise be to the Lord, who has not left you without a redeemer today." Obed would become the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David, the future king of Israel. Ruth, a Moabite woman, became part of the royal lineage that would ultimately lead to Jesus Christ, a profound testimony of God's grace and inclusion of outsiders into his redemptive plan. In the Ethiopian Bible tradition, the book of Ruth is cherished for its moral beauty, its message of faithfulness and divine guidance, and its role in connecting Israel's history to God's larger plan of salvation. Ruth's loyalty to Naomi Boaz's righteousness, and God's providence over ordinary events reveal that no act of faithfulness is ever unnoticed by God. Ruth reminds listeners that God's redemption can spring from the most unexpected places, and that his plans often unfold quietly through acts of love and faith.